Welcome, everybody, as well. I'm Lynette Mabuto from UCLA Anderson Executive Education Team, and just wanted to quickly welcome again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's session with Professor Blevins, which will focus on design thinking. I know you already had him the previous session, so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Professor Blevins. They're all yours. Thanks.
All righty. Thank you so much, Lynette. I appreciate that. And good to have everybody back in for class today. I see a few more folks coming in. Yeah, and if you'd like to turn on your camera, we'd welcome that. This session will be on design thinking. It's a natural flow from our last class on innovation, and it's gaining a lot of presence in MBA programs around the world. Really started in California for what the work's done at Stanford, and also a school in Canada. But before we start off with that, given that it's such a nice flow in from our previous course on innovation, I wanted to just take a few minutes and ask the students if there's any questions on our previous topic of innovation, anything you might want to bring up before we jump into design thinking, because to run an innovative organization, obviously you need to create an environment in which people feel comfortable bringing innovations together, and design thinking will help us do that. So I'll just look over, see if there are any questions. If not, we'll move forward with the next area. Is the S-curve only applied for tech companies, or can it be used to evaluate growth of any company? Absolutely any company. The S-curve was in place way before the growth of technology and the technology industry and what it's become today. The thing you want to take away from that on the S-curve is that the steepness of the S-curve, because of technology and the technology space, has gotten so much steeper. This is why, as time progresses, you have seen more aggressive actions by tech companies than you would say a traditional manufacturing firm or a pharmaceutical firm or a banking organization in financial services, because things are moving so much faster in tech. You can't afford to wait. And so the uptake is tremendous, especially with platform plays. Because if you have something that wins and wins big, it's a winner take all market. So that's why the steepness of the S-curve makes a lot of sense. So Gridelia, thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that. But yeah, S-curve, very traditional. That concept has been around for decades. It's just the steepness of the S-curve has gotten adjusted because of technology, and many business leaders from an older generation are adjusting very quickly. Business schools already have. We already understand that this is the way things change. Okay, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Well, I want to start off the session today. Just ask a quick poll about where you are, and I'll go ahead and launch this poll out with design thinking. Is this something you're familiar with? Is this something you understand, are you an expert at it? You've heard of it maybe? You're not familiar at all? Just what's the general rule? Because, some people have said, yeah, design thinking, well, wait a minute, what is it? So I'd just like to get an understanding of where everyone is here. And I see some folks coming in. I don't see any experts yet, so that's good that we're having this class then. So let me go ahead and end this poll and see if I can share out the results very quickly for you here. And what I want to do is let everyone know, as you can see here as I share the results out, that for most people, you've heard of it, you're somewhat aware of it, but rarely have you used it. You're not that familiar with it, but it's just more like, yeah, we know this thing before. So let me, this will help set the stage for this evening, for this session, I should say, as we go forward. And really, how you feel emotionally about a product has a lot to do with whether you buy it. If you just think of yourself like a consumer, how a product makes you feel, or how a company makes you feel, like if you feel it's a bad company or an evil company, you don't like to do business with those folks. An emotional feel has a lot more to do with how consumers take uptake on products, do business with a company, feel about a company than you might think of. So a good example might be Dyson. They are known as forward-thinking company. They are known for these innovative designs, things that people hadn't seen before, something unique, something interesting, something that works really well. And they actually have a very specific aesthetic to the products that they bring to market. And it's kind of consistent across their products even. So if you say Dyson or you see a Dyson product, you tend to know what it is, and they tend to be perceived as higher end, higher quality, unique, interesting, different. You think of that when you think of Dyson. And a lot of times people will also bring the same up with Apple. Apple is known as a forward-thinking design company. The innovations that they brought to the marketplace, the simplicity of the design upon which they've done. This has become almost a moniker brand for them as it is as their logo. It's very simple, very clean, there's no words associated with it, but you know exactly what it is. Their products are simple and easy. They don't come with big complicated manuals, even though it's easy to say a computer is a very complicated device. But you have a feel for it. People say that things like they love Apple. They don't necessarily say that about other operating systems or other computers or technology products, but boy, they do about Apple. Same with many of you I know working in an office environment. People say this about the Herman Miller chair, this very expensive office chair that is kind of thought how we office furniture and what it means. And Herman Miller pretty much did this single-handedly, and they kind of own the space. If you get a Herman Miller chair, you know what it is, you know it feels good. And this is a chair. It's an office chair, but not to Herman Miller. It's a productivity device. It helps people do what they do better. It's extremely high quality design, thought through on lots of different levels for what it is. Another might be Starbucks. This is the Starbucks store in Shanghai. It's one of their kind of mega stores, if you will. It's almost experiential in design. It's warm. It has the colors of coffee. It has very sinuous lines in its design. It's more than just a coffee store. It's an experience. And when people go to Shanghai, this becomes a tourist destination. People want to go in there. They want to experience the Starbucks culture, what it means. And of course, they've expanded far beyond coffee in this space. They have a high-end barista bar, which is very experiential. You actually sit and watch, and the barista tells you about the coffee, how the pour works, with like 15 different ways to make coffee. You know, what used to just be a simple cup of coffee has become very experiential. And again, very sinuous design, very welcoming, warm colors. When you walk in this store in Shanghai, and I could dare say this about many Starbucks around the world, and I know we have a global audience here, and Starbucks is very ubiquitous in many countries. You get a feeling when you walk in, like it's warm, it's cozy, it's inviting. Why do you feel that way? How does that work? How does a space make you have a feeling? And even when you go into the one in Shanghai, they have this little board. It kind of looks like a map, and you can actually go up to the wall and interact with it. And they have little cards that are associated with regions of the world where various coffee comes from. It tells you about it, how it's created, what it's made. So lots of different ways. And notice all the colors are very warm and inviting, and it's cozy, and you just want to be in there for a little while. Design has a way to do that. And it's not just spaces, it's also products as well. Things that you think through and you look at them and you go, wow, that's smart. Like, why didn't I think of that? And what I find when we do this design thinking course, we get a lot of students that say, yeah, why did I not think of that? That's really smart. It's really simple. Well, design thinking is a process where you and your teams can think those things and bring them into the marketplace. By the way, I love this rabbit wine opener. It's one of the most incredible devices. I happen to have one. But you've seen these every day. You go through your life as a consumer and you see these things as you do. If any of you ever done any home improvement projects, many like I have done, you might do some simple painting. Painting comes in these cans. Of course, you see the advertisements. It's very simple to apply this product, very easy. But in reality, it's not so easy. It's quite messy. It can be complex. It's hard to open these cans. There's a lot of spills. There are so many things about that the consumers have said, you know, maybe I can come up with something better. And if you remember when we talked about innovation, some of the best innovations come from users. They have the information. They have the knowledge to know what's wrong and to fix it. Even if it's simple as putting a rubber band on top of a paint can so you can brush the brush off and have all the drippings go right back into the can. Like, that makes sense. It's just a rubber band, something very simple, very easy to do. And what's kind of hard, or maybe if a brand, a manufacturer could just make the paint can better. And some have. Some have gained market share by trying to really think, how does a consumer use our paint? How is it on a Saturday when you paint your new child's bedroom? Thinking through how that is and how you can bring something product that could be better is a way to make consumers more productive, which makes your product better. The one that's really famous is this Norman door. You probably have heard of it, where just bad design of a door. And you shouldn't have to read a sign when you walk up to a door to know to push or to pull or to lock or to unlock or how it might work. But the Norman door is a known thing where the same handle could be used to push or to pull, but used in the wrong way. Of course, the flat one should be to push, the upright should be to pull. But so many times these things are done backwards, and it's so frustrating. You'll see people do this all the time, and they walk up to a door to go into a building, and they push when they pull, or they pull when they should push. That should be intuitive. Design should be good enough that they know what to do without even thinking about it. And if we can help consumers do that, then we are better managers in the process, and we can make better products that our consumers want. So what I'd like to do, and I'm going to open this up on the chat, and I'll ask anybody if you want to raise your hand. What are some products that you admire, something intuitive, something you go, wow, this is really good design, or I absolutely love this. What is that? Because I want you to think through it. I want you to think through, like, what products do you use personally that you go, wow, I love this thing? What could that be? I'm assuming, Sadish, that you're not talking about the wallpaper from the last one, but use the open chat section, or if you'd like, raise your hand and we'll call on you. But I'd love to hear from some of you. What products do you see in the marketplace that you like? Something you admire? Something that you go, that's a smart design. Bottle opener. Okay, Rupesh, go a little bit further. What kind of bottle opener? What makes it good about it? Yeah, the iPhone. A lot of people say the iPhone. I'm an Apple user. You know, I've bought full board. I've got the AirPods, the phone, the computer, the iPad. I love their products. They work well together. Yeah, AirPod. It still amazes me the quality of the sound and what they can do in that small device. It's incredible. Twitter, Ram, tell me what you like about Twitter. What makes Twitter so good? I'd like you to go a little bit further there for tea mugs that have infusers built in. I've seen those. That's really, really cool. If you're a tea drinker, there's nothing more frustrating than seeping your tea and then having the tea bag you have to dispense with, or it drips when you pull it out. Unable to unmute. So Ram will make sure that the team helps unmute so you can give us a response, or you can just type it in. But let's see if we can get Ram unmuted for us. Digital devices in the car. What do you mean by that? Go a little bit further. Wireless phone, watch, charger pads. Yeah. Why can't it all be wireless? That's fantastic. I wish my computer was wireless. That's the one thing I'm still tethered to. But we're getting there. We're making progress. Google Maps. Lyndon, I would agree. Google Maps is pretty intuitive. SpaceX and Tesla. That's a company. Both are companies. But I agree. Those are two quite remarkable companies. But I would say maybe Tesla is, but SpaceX isn't about design. SpaceX is about innovation. They are trying to push the envelope faster. They're not really worried about the design so much, but they are heavily worried about innovation. They want to go faster to innovate because they know it's going to take a while. Drip farming. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Why didn't we think of that before? Why are we wasting so much irrigation water? Car infotainment systems. Rajesh, tell me which one specifically. There's quite a few out there. Some are good. Some maybe not so much. Yeah, Alexa by Amazon. I like Alexa as well. Quite remarkable, the AI they use there. F1 cars improving. Formula One. Tell me about Formula One cars. What do you mean by that? Toddler carrier. Okay, I assume you're a parent of a young child. Which toddler carrier? There's some that are pretty incredible. Some, I don't know. Yeah, I like Zoom. Zoom, pretty amazing. Kindle, agree.
So, Professor, the car infotainment system I was referring to this. I'm using this Mahindra XUV300. And the system is amazing, at least from my perspective. It's as if going to a pub where you put some music and enjoy the time, right? So it's as if when you drive the car, you don't see the traffic, you just enjoy the music, and that's what I like.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Smart public toilets in Japan. I've seen those. They've got a few in San Francisco, in my country as well. Great safety. Yeah, absolutely. Tech product user interfaces. Yeah, if they're done well. So thank you, Dharmesh, for bringing that up. Most people think tech product user interfaces aren't good, but some of them are phenomenal. So we'll try to make those better. Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you so much for that. Keep putting them in the window. It's good for everybody to see these. I do this purposely because I want you to start thinking about it. I want you to really concentrate on, yeah, I do think that's a good design, but you might not even realize you're using it in that way. You might not realize how good it is. It's just so intuitive. You just use it. Well, that's not by mistake. That's done by strong leaders understanding the design thinking process and what its principles are. So I'm going to introduce those to you here. Edible fork and spoons. I think those are incredible. That's great to do. So on the design thinking is a concept. It's a methodology that provides a solution-based approach to solving problems. I mean, that's what we do as business leaders, right? We try to solve problems for our customers or for our internal customers or for our teams that we're working with. It's this concept that we go through of understanding exactly what the needs are, exploring some options, and then materializing those options in different ways. And we go through a variety of steps to make that happen. And sometimes we have to go backwards in those steps because it's an iterative process. One thing you'll learn about design thinking is it's very, very iterative. Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO, which is a significant design consultancy in this space, says it's a human-centered approach, human-centered, very key, especially for that company, to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkits to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of the technology to make it happen, and the requirements for business success. You got to have all of them to come together. This is what design thinking is. It's bringing all these amazing things together. And it's really not about design. That's only part of the process. I wish this concept would not have been called design thinking, because as soon as people hear that, they're like, oh, I'm not a designer. That's for somebody else. It's not design. It's a methodology upon which we do this process to bring high quality products to the marketplace. And so what you want to do as a business leader, when you bring new items, services, products to the marketplace, you want to look at what's desirable. What do humans actually want? So you look at human desirability for a product, because if they don't want it, they're not going to buy it. And then you also have to look at, well, if I make it, could it be viable? Does it make business sense? So there's got to be business viability in the concept. And if those two are there, then will you want to think, well, can we actually do this? Is it technically feasible to create whatever product or service we want to bring together? So if you bring together the concepts of desirability and viability, as long as feasibility, that's where you get some really incredible innovation, when those three things come together. And that's where you find the need to go for design thinking. It brings this concept together. So the first thing you have to do is look at what people's needs are to really understand what they want. And then you also have to look at a business's capability to actually make a profit from this. I understand if you're a nonprofit. I understand if you're an NGO. I understand if you're doing something to better the world and it's not about profit. It could be a nonprofit or a not-for-profit. But you still, even in those scenarios, have to cover your cost. Otherwise, you won't be a viable organization. I won't say a viable business, but a viable organization in the long term. So you always should think of it like a business leader, and you must be able to make profit, at least cover your cost, if nothing else. And then from a feasibility standpoint, it has to be technically capable. And then you have to ask yourself, do you and your teams have the know-how to actually make that work? So If you look at the cross between desirability and viability, that design is a brand or emotional design. That's where people desire your product and it's actually viable in the marketplace. You have a desire to own an Apple product. You have a desire to own a Tesla car. There is an approachability there to that product that you want. If you look at the combination between viability and feasibility, that's a service process design where you're actually seeing like, okay, can we make this work? And does it physically work? Can our manufacturing process produce it and produce it at scale and produce it well enough so it doesn't break in the process or break in shipping? That's design and process designing work. And then if you look at the difference between the desirability and the feasibility, that's the functional design. I desire something to have it, and does it actually work? If the product doesn't work, it may look cool, but I'm not going to buy it again. I'm going to buy it the first time and then complain about it. So these items overlap and come together. And as a business leader, you've got to bring them together. And usually where this occurs is you start from the approach of desirability. You've got to understand, what do our customers want? What is the marketplace demanding? What do they look for? And that sometimes takes some market analysis. It takes some entry strategy work. It takes some research and really looking at what consumers want. And then you've got to say, well, if we do that, could it be viable? I mean, is there a marketplace here? I understand somebody may want it, but our cost may be so high, nobody can afford it, whatever that might be. So if it's feasible, and you look at that as your third approach, usually from those, you actually go out through the design process. And so it usually goes in that order as you start looking at new opportunities for some new innovation, like we learned in our last course about what you might want to bring to the marketplace. And so the design thinking is an iterative process. It's about understanding the user, intimately understanding the user, challenging your assumptions, your team's assumptions. Don't assume you think you know what the user wants. Make sure you fully define what they need. And maybe even redefine the problem. The consumer may have a concern, but they may not be able to effectively define it for you. Sometimes you don't know what you need. Say if it was before the iPhone came out, you would have just said you want a nicer, faster flip phone from Nokia. You didn't even understand what the concepts could be for a smartphone until that major first smartphone came out from Apple in 2007. So the goal here is to identify alternative strategies and solutions using design thinking, because the solution you bring to the marketplace may not be apparent at first. And it's this iterative process where you do exploration, you analyze, and then you refine. And you do some more exploration off that refinement and analyze some more and refine again. So this constant back and forth is a solution-based approach where you're trying to solve problems. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of working. And it's really a collection of hands-on methods upon which you would go through. And design thinking is really used to solve really complex problems or problems that are just not well defined. We don't know exactly how to define this problem, or unknown problems. And as you can think like a business leader, if you can do those things, you could be very successful in the marketplace, because complex problems are hard to solve. And if you can do it and do it well, people will buy your product. So how does design thinking work? The real thing you want to understand on design thinking is about understanding the human needs. And that's the humans that are involved in using this product or service, and basically reframing this problem in very human-centric ways, not ways for you can manufacture it faster or better or easier, not ways you can distribute it better, thinking how the human uses the product. And so it brings together this concept of what is desirable from a human point of view and what is technologically feasible and economically viable. You bring those together and you'll be very successful here. So let's go back a little bit. I want to talk to you a little bit about the origins of where design thinking came from, so you can get a good understanding of why this is about. So it really started in 1969. Simon and McKim really used this inside the design thinking process for science and engineering. Remember, scientists and engineers are trying to solve really hard problems. And then in the 80s, Brian Lawson brought this into the architectural world, because before the 80s, buildings were very utilitarian. You didn't get that impressionable feeling, if you will, like you do today when you walk into a Starbucks or if you walk into a Four Seasons hotel. in the lobby, it smells different, the colors are different, the lighting is different. Everything about that four-season experience changes when you enter a room. So architecture was one of the first areas that really brought this on, and it was to bring in more participatory design process in architecture. How will someone use this room? How will someone use this building? What is the function of this architecture? What is this building supposed to get done? You know, we don't want it to be just a row of desks in an office building. What are these people doing at work while they're in that building? And can we make a building designed better to help them be better employees? And that's where this process came in. In 1982, this is where Nigel Cross introduced this concept really in a little bit broader terms, and it really became much more accepted in the business community, if you will, about you know, his thoughts around design thinking and what this could mean. And then in 1991, the results from that came out of David M. Kelly bringing together his thoughts in a consultancy called IDEO. IDEO is very prevalent in this space, and it basically got a lot of media coverage. It got some very high profile customers and case studies. And it really started with this. And by the way, they were kind of an offshoot with Stanford and what occurred in some of the Silicon Valley areas, about really understanding and helping their clients produce products and services better for those clients' customers. And then they said, maybe there's a process here, a methodology that we can use towards consulting as consultants. And so they moved towards consulting. So this is not so much a design house anymore as it is a consultancy. So from this start in the 60s and really being adopted by businesses in the 90s, IDEO kind of helped popularize this idea. And they did it by integrating empathy for the end users, using rationality of what could be done, and of course, infusing some creativity as well. You needed some very creative people to be a part of the team to make this happen. And you had some real prevalent household name companies like Procter & Gamble and IBM, Salesforce, really take this on and really give it some legs and some viability, and people heard about it. And then you had consultancies watching what IDEO was doing and say, you know, we should build a consulting practice around this, because what we do is we help companies solve their problems, their most complex and complicated problems. So McKinsey picked this up, Deloitte picked this up, as well as many others. And really, IDEO defines this simply as a process for creative problem solving. Sounds simple, but there's a lot more to it than that, because they think that design thinking really shouldn't just be a thought process. It'd be part of the entire product development cycle, from packaging to delivery to logistics to understanding how your consumers use this. It's part of a full-fledged journey of understanding how the customers use your products or services. So the foundation of this really is something we want to start with. And there are 5 main phases in design thinking, and they all interact together. First, you need to empathize. Then you need to fully define the problem, ideate on potential solutions, prototype those solutions, and then test them over and over. And you might go back and realize, like, oh, this thing that we're testing, the prototype we built, we didn't really understand the problem. Well, let's go back and ideate a little bit more. And if that doesn't help, then you're like, well, maybe we didn't understand what the end users were doing anymore, actually. Let's go all the way back to the beginning and empathize with our users. So you'll see these phases come about. And in the empathetic phase, the very first phase, is where you're trying to develop a really deep understanding of the challenge. And the way you do that is you have to understand what it is that consumers are doing with your product, what they're trying to accomplish. If you remember in the last course that we went through, you had the mountain biker whose pedals were flipping when they would come off the pedals. And so that mountain biker, the user, again, putting up just a small piece of styrofoam, a little foam on the pedal to add a little bit of friction so it wouldn't spin. There's a user solving their own problem. Can you and your team empathize enough with that consumer and figure out a way that could help him or her do what they do better with your product? That's the idea behind empathizing. And once you truly understand what they do, then you need to define the problem, clearly articulate what it is we're trying to solve. And I know that sounds simple, but really defining the problem of what you're trying to solve is more difficult than it looks like because everyone on the team may have a different thought process of what the problem actually is. So once that's fully defined, once you understand that, then you want to ideate. This is the brainstorming of potential solutions, something like, could this work? Could that work? And you want as many ideas out there as possible so you can figure something out. You figure that out, whatever you're going to define on, and then you want to prototype it. You have to test it, try different things, maybe a different process, maybe a different logistic shipping issue, maybe a different a way of approaching a customer. And once you've prototyped it a few times, then you want to test it. You want to take it to the marketplace, take it to the end users in a small, short cycle and be able to say, okay, what did this do? How did this work? And you go through this process of understanding to exploring to delivering. And you'll see these arrows go back and forth throughout the design thinking process. If your prototype didn't quite work, maybe you go back to the ideation phase. If the ideation phase wasn't creating something, maybe you didn't have the problem fully defined. And when you get over to this ongoing process in set number 3, where you're building, you're measuring, you're sustaining what it is you do, don't stop there. Once you have something in the marketplace, that's when you want to keep going back, reviewing it, and then seeing, hey, can we keep doing this and make it better and better and better? In today's competitive marketplace, you have to do that. Now, the one thing I will say at the beginning, and you'll see this in some of the design thinking things, it's something I'm very keen on, is adding a first step before the empathizing of doing your research, understanding what it is you're trying to go after, where it is, and that research can take multiple areas inside and outside your company. There's kind of a randomizing you want to do there. But these phases are continual. And so you're the business leader here. You're the one that's going to have to approach this and focus this. And so there is a focused strategy you'll need to take as a leader. And the first I want to talk to you about is this double diamond strategy. And so the double diamond strategy, as you as the team leader, have to know when and how to effectively guide your teams with very loose rein or to rein them in a little bit more. And so at the beginning of the process, when things are a little more unknown, when you're trying to actually think of things that are new, you want a very divergent process. You want your team to be more freewheeling. You want them to create some choices. And once those options are out there on the table, then you need to be more of a convergent leader because you've got to make some choices. We have to move forward on some of these. We can't do them all. And so you'll see this kind of gives you the shape of a diamond, if you will. And you'll have this divergent and convergent thinking that'll happen. So the first thing you will do, and by the way, this happens over time through a project when you and your team are deciding we're going to go forward and working together to try to solve some amazing problem that needs, we know there's a market demand in the marketplace. The first thing you're going to do is observe. And this is very divergent thinking. You don't want to bring any preconceived notions. You don't want your team to be hindered or hampered in any way. You want them to be very open and very loose. And there's a management style associated with that. But once you start trying to get into the defining stage, you're really trying to define what it is that this user is trying to do with our product or service, you move from divergent thinking to convergent thinking. And as a leader, you've got to make a shift. And I know many of you have probably worked for leaders. And if you think back, you might have thought, well, this leader that I'm working with, wow, one day he tells me this, the next day he tells me that. One day she wants more, one day she wants less. And you're thinking to yourself, wow, this leader is not a very good leader. They don't know what they're doing. They may have been following this divergent and convergent thinking process because it's a shift. And so after you've defined the process, you got a real good, clear definition of what it is we're trying to solve, you actually want to go to the next thing, which is back to divergent again. You want your users, your teammates, your team members, the people that work with you, to generate ideas. You want that ideation process to be, again, free-flowing. If you hamper the ideas before they're ever brought out, you're not going to get the best ideas there. So then you're back to a very divergent thinking type of leadership. And then once all the ideas are on the table and we got to pick the best ones to do a prototype because we can't do them all, then you're back to convergent thinking. So you can see here, this is why they call it the double diamond. It looks like two double diamonds here. You see this process where you go from divergent to convergent thinking over time. And so there are two clear parts of this diamond where you're defining the strategy and you're doing the execution of the solution. And again, over time, you are thinking ways of how you can move between these processes, these 5 phases, and you may go back and forth. And every time you feel, or your team feels, usually it's a group decision, that you need to go back to do something, like we need to ideate more, we need to empathize more, we need to more clearly define the problem, we didn't get it right, the prototype proved that. You'll go back and your management style will change again, depending on which phase you're in. So again, think of this double diamond strategy as your guide as a leader upon how you want to approach these things. So when you're in the research phase, this first part of the first diamond, where you're doing discovery, you're doing business analysis, user surveys, user testability, you're asking and inquiring how your users use this product. Again, you want to think through a very divergent leadership process. But when you get to the parts of insights and defining out the affinity maps, user flows, the personas for which you're solving for, prioritizing which ones are more important, that's back to a convergent thinking. And then, of course, when you get to the ideation process, that's going to be divergent. Things like design, a design studio, a rapid prototype testing, wireframing. You do this a lot in the software and technology space. You'll do a lot of wireframing, testing, iterating, validating. You want to have a more open thought process there. But when you move it over to the prototyping phase, user testings, a final wireframing, functional prototype designs, then you're back to convergent. So this double diamond process will help drive your leadership skills and how they need to change through the process. And it's designed to be this change this way. So this double diamond process actually converges on top of the 5 phases of design thinking. So when you're in the discovery phase, you're really trying to empathize with the user and understand what it is they want to get accomplished. You're doing, customer journey maps, wide perspectives. When you're coming into defining the process, clearly articulating what it is that the organization you work for needs to fix or solve or improve or invent, that is a much more focused area. And then, of course, once you have that clearly defined, you're back to the ideation process, a wide perspective. Throw us everything. What could you do here? Prototyping, converging. And remember, you're going to be doing this over and over again. This is a process that doesn't end. You always want to iterate. You always want to improve. There's always room for improvement. Just look at Apple Computer. They don't just stop at one version. They're continually improving to stay at the top of their game. And you'll see this kind of convergent theory between convergent and divergent thinking go across the process as you move through it. And so just understand how that happens. Now, as a leader, you can't have your teams be too freewheeling all the time. And so you'll see this loose, tight leadership kind of capability come in, where at the beginning, you want to create a safe space for your employees. You want to encourage them to bring forth ideas together. No discrimination, no set judgments. Bring everything forward. There are no stupid ideas. You want to be able to bring them all in. A very wide open space, because your people need that flexibility to be able to come up creatively with things. And everyone is creative, by the way, not just the creatives. The intellectuals are creative as well. But over time, you know what the end goal is going to be for this team. They have to create a product or service. So you continually tighten down your divergent thinking. So each step of the process, as you move closer and closer to actually getting a marketable product, will be less divergent, meaning you will continually tighten the funnel as you start moving closer and closer to the innovation. So yes, you will be modulating your management styles between convergent and divergent thinking, but you'll also be tightening them throughout the process. So you're keeping things a little bit more in control, a little bit more in rein, And as you get towards the end of the process to actually bring in a marketable product to the marketplace, it'll be far less. So you'll hear this concept of flare before focus. And divergent thinking is really thought of flaring before you do this focusing for the discovery part. And you want to be able to think of flaring as really gathering user ideas, seeking, here you want to have a high quantity, you defer judgment. But when you get to the more focused area, that's when you're trying to narrow things down as a leader, narrow down these choices so you can make some informed decisions. And it will get tighter and tighter throughout the process. So this overlaps with the double diamond theory and the fact that you will flare at points and then you will focus at points as you go through the double diamond, as you see the overlap here. So in the discovery phase, you're trying to understand the challenge. What is our user trying to do? You're preparing, you're researching, you're gathering inspiration. Again, you want to give a wide range there. But when you get the interpretation phase, you're trying to tell a story. What's this particular persona trying to do? You're searching for meaning. You're trying to frame the opportunity in a way that can help you get to the ideation process. So now that you've got a clearly defined problem, you can generate some ideas around it and you can refine those ideas. Again, a little bit more focused because this point in the stage of this process, you have a better understanding of what it is the problem that you're trying to solve. So in experimentation, you want to make prototypes. Remember, you're further down the line here. Prototyping can be expensive. You have to make your selection, try a few quick ones perhaps, get some feedback. And then as you finish the process and it actually gets a product to market, you want to track the learnings. You want to have kind of a continual revision that goes on and on. You don't just let it drop at that point once something makes it to the marketplace. You constantly keep bringing these things in so you can learn. I'm just taking a quick look at this slide. All right, I'll come to some of these questions in just a second. So on the design process, this is really about creative exploration. So I want to set another poll here and ask if you work for a design focused industry or firm. So let me just get a quick understanding here from the users. There we go. And I'll pull this poll up for us here. Okay, you should see that now. So if everybody could just, do you work for a design-focused firm or industry? I would really like to know because we're trying to get an understanding for who we have in the class and where this is. And thank you for typing it in the, but use the poll if you would on screen. It should be on your screen right now. That way we'll kind of calculate. All right, looks like we have most everybody there. A few more coming in. Thank you. Okay, thank you. These are probably the folks that answered us in our chat window. So let me end the poll here, and I want to share out these results. So as you can see, some 58% are in design thinking, but maybe 42% of you are not in a design-focused industry or with a design-focused firm. And for those 42% of you, I would say you might be. I think every firm is actually a design-focused firm. I don't care if you're doing the most mundane manufacturing, or maybe you're working in agriculture or mining. Every single process, every single industry can be design-focused, working more in the eyes of your customers that can help improve them. And this design thinking process can be very messy at the beginning, but as you get closer and closer to a real design, you can understand and see how it actually can be drawn down into. So as a leader, you're having to manage and deal with uncertainty. You're having to bring these things forward in an uncertain manner and deal with that. And usually young leaders have difficulty with that because it's the focus part that they're really good at. We're really good at driving results, driving the KPIs. But if you embrace the design thinking process here, you can understand that this is part of it, that you're expecting to have uncertainty. You're expecting to see what you can do in the research process to try to gain some insights, work towards greater clarity and focus, And if you can do that, that focus comes much more clearly. So I did see a question pop up here about the pharma industry. Now, pharmaceuticals is known for being risk averse. Obviously, you're dealing with lives, and in a medical profession, you need to be very focused on this. But pharmaceuticals, some of the most amazing pharmaceuticals have come from some of the most crazy areas that we didn't think of. Some plant that grows in some top of some mountain somewhere in the world, or only available in one desert in one part of the planet. Like, how was that discovered? How was that found? But it solves something. Same thing with the little herbs or something that we find. The ability for a pharmaceutical company to be able to allow its users, its people that work in the labs, to understand the process better. So maybe actually work with a patient that's having this issue and then think, oh, I know of a potential solution that might work with that. I heard of some tribal ancient formula or some Eastern medicine that used to deal with something like that. Let me try it out. Even though pharmaceuticals might be risk adverse by their nature, you still have to give an ability for an area to go and design thinking that they can say, I'm going to try this. And ironically, some of the most amazing drugs, some of the biggest sellers, and I'll use one, Viagra. Viagra actually came to try to do something else, but its side effect was what it actually does. And that side effect, which was reported during trials, someone in the company said, we might have a market here for this. And it is a huge market for them, like huge moneymaker. So you never know where the greatest ideas can come from, but you have to have an environment and a culture that embraces that, as we learned in our innovation class last time, and then use leadership skills through a process like design thinking to focus that. So I believe it can be used in every industry. So to go around with this, design thinking is really a process that you go through that creates solutions that will actually be adopted by the user. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've sat with companies to help them come up with something great. They sit in a boardroom usually, and they think, oh, the user will love this, and the user will love this. And I'm like, why do you think that? You're not even the user, the end user. And sometimes that can be the case. So remember, through this ideation process, you need to do some more experimenting, because the solution is not always obvious there. So one of the things you want to do is really focus on the customer. So IDEO is really, really big on this. It's about human-centered design. So a lot of times we hear user interface, UX. It's not a user, it's a human. So call them a human. So it should be human interface, not user interface. And the concept here, that again made popular by IDEO, is that you would use your inspiration to your ideation to your implementation as you go through this convergent and divergent process of thinking. And really understand, by overlaying this design thinking process, for products and services that people would actually use and want to enjoy. And so IDEO brought together this thought process between design thinking and human-centered design, where you're going through the same steps of empathizing and defining and ideating and prototyping, but at the same time, you're using this focus and flare capability of divergent, convergent thinking to look for inspiration at the beginning, all the way down to implementation at the end, and of course, testing throughout the process itself. And so as a leader, you got to understand how these pieces work. So the majority of that time, you're going to be driving your team to think in new, innovative ways. Now, we learned innovation in the last course, but here we have to learn a process of design thinking. How do we get creative in solving our users' problems? And the way we do that is by understanding them. And we understand them by giving them empathy, by having empathy for them. So I want you to open up your microphones here, and I'm going to look over for raised virtual hands in the classroom about what is empathy. This is kind of this weird word. You don't normally hear this a lot in business settings, but I want to ask you, what is empathy? How do you go about empathizing with the user and understanding what it is that they need or they want? So what is empathy? So Grandrilia, let's go to you first, please. You had your hand up. Grandrilia? Sorry, Andrilia, I apologize. I was looking at it incorrectly.
No problem. Empathy is to understand what the customer is actually feeling. And then, so I can give you an example. So when I was part of an agency where I used to run the agency, and we used to talk to a lot of startup companies, and they had a usual problem of trying to make a successful marketing campaign in a very limited budget. So they would be like, I don't have the money to run a campaign. Then tell us something that I want to be sure that the campaign will definitely run. Now, being in the marketing field for such a long time, I know that they don't have the budget to spend on the marketing, right? So that's where you start thinking, what can be done to, make it easier for them, or to give them a forecast that, okay, so this is the amount that we spend and you will definitely get results. So that's where it's part of like empathizing with the end user, or the person who has the problem, and trying to find a solution.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's always understanding their problem the way they see it. Absolutely. Renvisa, let's go to you, please. Still on mute. There you go.
Hello, Professor. Yes, from empathy, I would mean that, as I understand, it is more to do with your personal first-hand exchanges and interactions with the customer or the users, or as humans, as you say, and try to understand what are the difficulties they are facing to overcome a certain problem, or to jump a hump, a crossover from a certain challenge area. And it's more to do with your putting yourself in their shoes to understand it. So unless you are trying to be mentally doing a role play, you may not be able to understand it. So that's where I feel that empathy would come in.
Yep. Lyndon agrees with you in the chat, being in a customer's shoes. You'll hear that a lot, like stand in my shoes, be in my shoes. What does that mean? What are we really trying to say there? Let's go to Apkisha. Apkisha, go ahead.
Yes, Professor. So I was also gonna say putting yourself in customer shoes. But to clarify what it's all about, it's about thinking like your customer would do, keeping their cultural, social circumstances in mind when you work on a product or service for them. I'll give you a very simple example, and I was just able to think that that's probably an example of design thinking. We were working on a tool some time back for an American client, and the developer at our end was an Indian. So they used the DDMMYY format for the date without thinking that the customers are American and they will not be able to follow this format because Americans are used to the MMDDYY format. So we failed to empathize with the customer there. And had we understood that they come from a different place where the format is different, we would have done it the other way. So that's empathy.
That's a good point to bring out. Cultural differences have a huge impact on how you design or create a product for a particular market. The product you might bring together in Saudi Arabia or is different from what you might bring together in Australia, is different from India, is different from the UK, is different from Russia. Absolutely, culture has a lot to do with that. Thank you so much. As Aditya said, ability to understand need, want, and emotion of a person. Face the same problem as they are facing. Vandana, you had your hand up. Let's hear from you. Vandana?
They lowered their hand, I think.
Lowered their hand. All right. Ram, let's go to Ram. We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, so Prof said it's about understanding users.
How do you do that? How do you understand a user?
Well, we try to understand profile of the persona of the user by understanding, like, what age group the user belongs from, the cultural background the user comes from, the region a user comes from, what could be by design sort of limitations from religious, cultural, or social point of view, and then on top of it, what exactly would be the motive of that user behind using this product? What would be the requirement of that user or those users behind using this product, etc., etc. So it's basically understanding the user and then capturing requirement, motivations, and then kind of putting it across to the product team. I mean, to the development team, basically.
Okay, well, bringing those together is tough, but I like the way you say it. It's really understanding why they're using this. Vandana, you're back and you have able to unmute now. So let's go back to you.
Yeah. For me, design thinking, as I've been a customer facing person all the time, it's more to do with understanding the pain points of the customers, and it's like the amalgam of what all of them have given their inputs.
And
something to do
how do you
with,
understand the pain point? How do you do that as a company or as a leader?
we kind of spend a lot of time understanding the requirement. We kind of the role plays, like what most of my colleagues or my classmates have spoken about. So it's also to do with background they come from, the cultural and the social backgrounds set up. It's to do with the region that they come from. It's to do with the technology being available in that region. It's to do with the kind of setup they have as an organization, and a lot to do with their own requirements. So, and how you could fit in along with the given setup with the requirement is what you kind of think about, and then come up with the solutions. So it's understanding the requirements and then coming up with the solutions.
Okay, good to hear. And Ranveer, I saw you ask a lot of questions. You might actually be more than just asking, you might just observe. Sometimes you can ask a question like, do you like this product? Oh yeah, I like this product. Sure, I like it. Yeah. So there's always that understanding. It's empathy is just this weird say, especially in the business context of what is empathy. Because when we bring products to market, and we're bringing them to market now in a globalized environment, the world is getting closer and closer together. So a product you bring together in Europe versus North America versus Southeast Asia, a lot of times they are very similar, and they're becoming more similar. But there are still uniquenesses, and really this one size fits all approach doesn't work so much anymore, because everyone wants to have one-to-one direct marketing. They want a product specific to them if they can. And so what you want to really do is a deep understanding of what would make this user successful if they used your product. And what you're trying to do with empathy is really see the world the way they see it, not passing judgment on how they see it, not thinking the way they should see it, actually the way they see the world, and appreciating them for human beings that they are. They might have a cultural belief or a desire that may be different from yours. Doesn't make it wrong. It's just if you understand it and you understand how it makes them feel or why they're motivated to do something, you can understand who they are and really have a understanding of what they are seeking in this process. So for empathy, it's really the ability to understand and share the feelings of one another. Feelings are very important here. And there's this really critical foundation for the development of products, services, and environment. So if you can create empathy for the user, that's really the first step for this design thinking process. If you don't understand and feel the way they feel, the ideas you come up with, the things you create may not speak to them. And so that's one of this process is you want to actually create empathy for them. So we're all business leaders. Many of us are type A personalities. We're quite similar in our nature. And so when I started teaching design thinking, I had to stretch myself to think differently the way that I think about this process. But a business thinking model, we would come up with a whole bunch of problems for a particular market or segment, or someone we're trying to solve products, provide products for, and we come up with some solution. Now, in a design thinking model, what we really want to do is understand the problem using abductive thinking. And we might discover more problems than we thought about. There might be several problems. Yeah, we see the main problem, but we might discover new ones that we didn't even understand. We didn't even see because we really weren't that deep into it. And so maybe not just one solution, there might be multiple solutions that we come through. And so we're creating empathy through observing, asking, engaging, watching, listening, really all of these component pieces. It's not just a user survey. It's not just, do you like something, yes or no? It's actually observing them, because sometimes what they do versus what they say is different. And when we do that, this abductive thinking may help us come up with even different solutions, or solutions that the consumer may not even have known that they needed or wanted, or a problem that they had that they didn't even know that they had. And so this allows us to be able to do this. So I'd really like to find out from you, because all of you work in organizations, how does your firm, your organization, obtain user requirements for this desirability? Because, sorry, I left that open there. So how does that actually occur in your process? So let me bring up this poll here for us, because I just want to see. Let me put this over here. Do you do market analysis? Are you doing surveys, focus groups? Do you do partnerships, or you don't know, or is there something else? And I'll look at the chat window over here too. If there's something else that you do, I'd love to hear about it. Do you reach out to key clients? Do you reach out to your most complaining client? Do you reach out to your best clients? Do you reach out to people that are not current customers? How do you get user requirements? I'd love to see how that is. And thank you. We're getting a good variety of responses here on the poll. Interesting. Still getting some answers coming in. Thank you. Okay, so let me close the poll out. I'll go ahead and share these results. So you can see here, quite a variety. Maybe even it could be, by industry. Market analysis is obviously one big one. Customer visits. I love customer visits. I think that's a good way. Partnerships a little bit less. Focus groups is always a good way, but those tend to be longer, more expensive. You got to make sure you have the right group of people in the focus group, all kinds of things of that nature. I'm glad to see that we didn't have a lot of don't know. That helps us understand, like, there's more than one way to actually bring forth these ideas. But you as a leader have to figure out what that approach is going to be into bringing this into your organization. And I know many of you have heard of design thinking, but you may not have done it yourself. And by the way, Satithi, I see you have your hand up. Before I go to this next section, did you have a question you wanted to bring up before we move forward? Or is that from a previous comment? If not, I'll give you a moment here to go ahead and ask our question. Shantithi? No? Okay. Then I'll move forward. I'm going to go ahead and just manually lower your hand. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about this approach. And this is kind of usually what you'll see when you start doing design thinking workshops. It's a bunch of people. There's always sticky notes involved, it seems like, for some reason. The 3M sticky notes are everywhere. It's very colorful. Usually you have lots of colors. We tend to get into a room and we put them all over the walls, and we put little posters together. We move them around. It's a way to facilitate a discussion inside an organization. Like, okay, let's start thinking through these processes, start ideating. Kind of helps us, bring things together. But as you can see, it's kind of looks like a little bit of like a children's playroom. If you have young children, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. But if you go to a preschool, or maybe your child's young child's school, it's very bright colors. There's lots of things to touch and to play with. And you ask yourself, well, why is that? One of the things we're trying to do is get young children to exercise their minds. We want to have things that could stimulate their minds, things that get them to try things and experiment with things. And if you think about it, when you engage with a child, they will ask any kind of question. They will do anything. They don't like, yeah, why? Get always the why question. They'll try things. They don't have any preconceived notions because they're so young. Their experience level is so much less than ours. So they're a little more free thinking. And what a great way that is. And that's kind of the beauty of being a child. So when you think about the environment that you put a child in, this is where we're seeing things come together in a corporate environment with design thinking. We actually kind of want it to be a little bit childlike in its approach, because we want adults, business users who've, kind of a little bit older, maybe set in their ways, to break that dissonance and to think outside the box. I hate to use that term, but it's a good way to say it here. To think through how this could be. So a little corporate boardroom might look like a little playroom instead. And so you're trying to get them to think outside themselves, really go beyond and produce a set of ideas to ideate. So this is a natural process for people. It might feel unusual for you as a leader. It doesn't feel very business-like, but that's where some great ideas can come from. We're trying to generate this creativity approach. And so one of the things we do in this process is to bring new folks in. And in design thinking, we all are in the same group. Sometimes we all work with the same team day after day. We might transfer, we might get a new person transfer in every now and then that brings in new ideas. And you'll see that sometimes when you get a new team member, suddenly there's a new thought process that comes in. That actually is good, because that new team member that came into your group doesn't have a base to go from before. They're seeing things with a fresh set of eyes. There's no bias involved. There's no background or history of, oh, we tried that a few years ago and it didn't work. So one of the things that many strong business leaders do, number one, recognize it, but number two, bring that type of process in by randomizing the ideas, starting before the empathizing process and actually throwing out a bunch of random things, different types of thinking that can bring in some new ideas to make this a little bit more random. You want some randomness in this process. Again, something business users don't normally like. But if we do it, we can come up with some really amazing things. Because when we randomize these views, we're getting a very unbiased viewpoint coming in. And it might be the wrong idea. It might be the bad thing, but don't put a damper on it yet. That bad or wrong idea might spark an idea of something else that we didn't think of. Even as we defend why it's a bad idea, something might go, but I could see how this could work this way. And it might create a whole new thing. That's innovation. That's driving things forward. And this is what you can get through the design thinking process. So how do you bring these new randomized ideas into your organization to go through this process before you even start? Well, one is force your team members to look out from where they are right now. Look outside your company. Look at suppliers. Look at partners. Of course, look at customers. Maybe even look at people outside your industry. I notice, and by the way, you can all depend on one another for this as you get to know one another as classmates. Ask other senior leaders at other organizations, other companies, and say, hey, I've got this situation. What do you think? They come at it with a fresh set of eyes. So bring those things in, maybe even non-users, people that would never use your product. Ask them what they think, because they never even thought of using your product or service. That randomization will actually help create a new set of processes that will help you figure these things out. Now, you've heard me talk about this kind of circular process, and this is the ideation process. It's circling when it's appropriate. You empathize until you truly understand the user. And once you get past that point, you can define the problem. If you find yourself getting stuck on, well, what is it we're really trying to do? If the problem is not easily defined by your team, go back and empathize again. It's okay. So this is, again, not normally what business users do. We have a very defined business flow process, maybe a Gantt chart that works. This is what we do. We have gates that we must go through. Not in the design thinking process. If it's not ready yet, it's not ready yet. Go back. And if you define the process and you can't come up with any ideas, maybe in the ideation process, the business problem isn't really well defined. So go back. And the same with prototyping. Go back to ideation. This is a very circular process. Again, it feels uncomfortable for a lot of business users to do, but by this circling back, we get a better feeling of, what's common and what's to be expected. We define, we ideate, we prototype, we test, and of course, then we finally deliver. And by the way, we continue to do that over and over again. This process was a never ending. So the user-centric, human-centric design really embraces this ideation process where you plan and you plan and you plan until you get it right. And then you do research until you get it right. And then you do different design thoughts process until you get it right. And you adapt and then you measure in a continual process. And it keeps circling back around because after you do that, you want to plan for the next iteration, plan for the next version, plan for the next design that's coming out. And this process continually revolves around. So what design thinking is not, this is not something that only designers can do. That is the number one thing I get. We're not the design team, give it to the creatives. That is absolutely false. Anyone can do design thinking. Design thinking is not a check the box activity. You will have that on your teams. You will see someone that's like, oh, we have to go through this process with the sticky notes. They will come at it with a bad attitude. You've got to pull them in. This is not just something we have to do because it's been told to us to do. It's not something you can rush either. Again, that ideation, that iteration process, it might take a while. So as a leader, just understand that. And really, it doesn't assume any particular solution. And you'll have to recognize that your teams will come into the initial thought process of this with a preconceived notion. Try to get them to leave that at the door. Don't assume anything for some preconceived notion. And another thing, it doesn't shy away from failure. The process is fraught with failure. You can expect failure. Your prototypes will fail. You will not fully empathize and understand what the user is wanting. You might have to go back 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times. This is part of the process. This is normal. This is to be expected. But this is where really breakthrough innovations come from. It's that trial and error. It's that ability. So let me give you some examples here. Hopefully, we started with a thought process at the beginning of the course about give me some things that you really like. Let me throw some other examples out here that really might generate some spark. IBM has done this. IBM has a design thinking process they have called the loop. They have actually gotten so good at this that they actually use it as part of their consulting services. They claim it produces a 301% ROI. I don't know where they got the 1%, but a high ROI on this. And a matter of fact, they're so confident in this and they know it helps them drive business and they want to improve the world. They've given you their enterprise design thinking toolkit available for free on the web at this link. They want you to engage with this. Again, their process is called the loop. So it's available out there. And you'll, of course, have these slides at the end of the slide deck. One good example came from PillPack. Many of you may be familiar with this company. They were bought by Amazon for quite a bit of money. 2019 acquisition for $753 million US. But the consideration here behind PillPack was that it's generating a lot of revenue, up to $5,000 in revenue for this. And it was founded by a pharmacist and an MBA. So who had asked me about pharmaceuticals earlier? So this is directly for you. Ages 32 and 35, they basically saw the complications in a person, a user, not just necessarily an old person, any person that takes medications, understanding when do I take this medication, at what time, how much should I take. This was actually put together as 2014's best innovations in Time magazine, but it lays out person by person exactly the pills of when they should take, how they should take it. Super simple, directions are printed right on. You rip it off, all the pills are in there. It even has an app that reminds you what to take, when to take. And Amazon is leveraged this, and there's some high dollar value. Pharmaceuticals is not a low cost industry. So this is true innovation coming in by PillPack. GE Imaging also did this for MRIs. One of the things that they noticed, because you want, if you produce a product that makes an MRI, you want more MRIs to be had. For children, however, to get on a bed that goes into an MRI machine for imaging is very scary. It's a hospital. It's loud. There's no carpet in the room, so there's echoing. So it was a very scary thing for a child, and many of the children had to be sedated before they went into this. So simple little things, thinking like a child, thinking like what kind of experience are they getting? So they made the MRI like a ride, like they're going on a ride like through a tunnel. And 80% of the kids that had to be forcibly sedated, that dropped to 10%. It was easier on the child. It was obviously easier on the parent. It benefited them commercially. it's really thinking like, who is going to be using this product or service that we're making? I love this example from Swiffer. Swiffer in 1999 introduced from Procter & Gamble. It is in 15 countries. It's a $500 million brand. And this just amazes me how deep people will go for the design thinking phase. People weren't seeking a stronger, cleaner. They started watching consumers, and what they noticed, and again, this is someone was watching videos of housewives cleaning the house. I can't imagine something being more boring. But one of those videos, one of the observers recognized that when a housekeeper went to clean up particles on a floor, I think it was coffee grounds that got spilled, she actually wet a paper towel, and the wet paper towel helped clean up the coffee grounds better than a dry paper towel. And it helped them think like, wow, maybe we could produce a product that actually would help pick up dust or particles better with a little bit of moisture. And then the other thing they recognized, that if you used a mop to do this type of work, you actually had to clean the mop. You didn't throw it away, obviously. So they made the pads disposable. So again, and it's a whole line of products now with the Swiffer line, a $500 million brand by understanding consumers. Airbnb did this because their initial product was getting strangers to trust other strangers on, is this a good place to stay? And so in order to overcome that reluctance to trust strangers, they started getting people to do user-generated reviews on the platform. Now that seems normal today in our shared economy world, but for Airbnb, it was brand new. They had to figure out how to do this thing. The other thing they noticed early in the start of their process was in New York City, where bookings just weren't taking off, but yet it's a huge market and it's a very expensive market. Consumers of the Airbnb product they weren't feeling comfortable because the photos of these smaller New York City apartments weren't very good. It didn't show very well. So what did they do? They hired a professional photographer. They were thinking like the end user, and they made the user feel comfortable because the pictures were clear, they were well lit, and they felt comfortable saying, okay, I would stay at that location. Again, think like your consumer to try to figure out what it is that needs to be done. Another success came from Bank of America, the large US bank. They recognized that most people, when they balanced their checkbook, would simply round up the cents at the end because, it was less than $1. They didn't really care. And so to make checkbook balancing easier, it was just easier not to deal with the spare change. So IDEO helped them out in 2004 with the idea called Keep the Change program. So Bank of America could proactively take that extra change, round up or down to the next amount, take the extra change and put that automatically in a savings account for the user. And that process ended up with 2.5 million new customers signing up for a Bank of America account, 700,000 more new checking accounts being opened, and 1 million more new savings accounts being opened because you had to have an account to put this extra change in. And people were naturally saving in this process, and of course, made their checkbook balancing much easier at the end of the month. Again, Bank of America thinking like the consumer, watching the consumer, understanding how the consumers used banking products, at least Bank of America banking products. So there are benefits to truly empathizing with your user and understanding how you can go about this. So the value of design thinking is about really understanding this, where an environment that you can bring out divergent voices. Nothing could be better than to have diversity within your organization that goes across your group to have people bring their thought processes forward. And what that does, especially for us as a global audience with business leaders around the globe attending this course, is helps us understand other people's points of view. It's very inclusive design that helps us think through different cultural aspects and maybe help bridge the gap between designers in one country and users in another country. And we get rid of this top-down thinking. It's about problem synthesis, so you can bring different ideas forward. It's about hearing divergent voices, voices that may not feel comfortable speaking up, especially if you're in a society where it's male-dominated. Some female members of your team may not feel comfortable bringing their ideas forward openly and honestly, and yet they may have the best idea in the room. So you want to create that environment that supports divergent viewpoints, and not only supports them, it celebrates them, it gets them to come out. And remember, the value of all this is very low cost. Nothing's been built yet. We're just talking about ideas. Ideas are cheap. Talk is cheap. No solution or money's been spent here, but you can come up with some of these ideas and actually bring forth some really innovative things. Now, I do want to mention this to this class. I know many of you, and I'm looking here at the cameras, are in technology. I am as well. And I found myself getting in this technology trap. Oh, I can write a software that'll fix that. Oh, we can make an app that will fix that. And you get into this trap that actually makes it more complicated for the user. So I'll give you an example. If you just want to open your car door, one of the things that car companies have wanted to do is help people do that easier. Let's say their hands are full. So what do you do when you have one of these automatic car door openers? Now, you want to walk up to your car and you want to have the door physically open. But in between were all these steps of this application of technology, and I believe Ford was the big one that did this. You had to pull out your smartphone, wake up your phone, enter your credentials, Face ID or whatever, swipe through icons, find the app, tap the automotive app, wait for it to load, navigate to the menu, unlock button, and then do slide to unlock. And then you finally got the physical car door open. This center process, I just want to walk up to the car and have it open. That's my goal anyway. This center process is the digital interface that the company is forcing me to go through. I just want to open the car door. So if you thought through this, really the best thing is no user interface. You'll hear this called zero user interface. That's the best one you could have. So what did they do? They created a sensor. So if your hands are full, you could just simply walk up to the car, wave your foot underneath a sensor, and the door would open. There's no user interface. There's no GUI. There's no UX, if you will, that makes this happen. It's about how users use this, whether it's a woman carrying a child or a man carrying a heavy package. Just wave your foot and the door opens. Try to get to make sure you don't fall into these steps where you're forcing your users to do something technologically that you think may be a great idea, but is really a pain for them. Remember, zero user interface. Go back to the Norman door. There shouldn't have to be it should be intuitive how to use this product. Don't make it so complicated. And sometimes technology does that for us, and that we want to prevent. There are financial benefits to this. Forrester, a very well-respected firm, has analyzed this. It reduces time. It reduces development and testing. It cuts defects in half. It's faster time to market. IEEE had a great article on why software fails. They did a white paper on it. 3 of the top 12 product failures are causes from user-centric design-related issues, not from software design. It's about not understanding the user, whether it's poorly defined requirements, or understanding what the stakeholders want. And I know many of you do software development, so be sure you understand that. There's a reason to invest in this. It improves the user experience to save you money. It reduces upfront cost. It increases your revenue. It reduces the amount of time you spend on fixes and corrections. And it drives great competitive advantage. Think of IBM or Uber or Dyson or Mint or Apple especially. And the Design Management Institute has proven that design forward focus companies, the ones here in this list, outperform the S&P 500 by 211%. So when people come back to you and say, we don't want to do that design thinking that you heard about, prove to them that it does make sense. And you're going to hear these criticisms that this is just human intuition. We should be able to know how to do it. Like, okay, so you made an MRI into a ride for a kid. That seems normal, right? That's, yeah, whatever. It's no big deal. Paint it some whimsical colors. Well, then why didn't we think of that before? Ask them back to that. The other thing somebody will say is like, well, it doesn't do much criticism of work. You don't want that criticism of work. You want the new ideas to come forward. That's where new ideas spring forward. So design thinking helps you solve business problems. You solve business problems, you win in the marketplace. It's not about design thinking. It's about the whole design and process. And it's really approaching this from a human-centered approach. So I hate that misnomer. I tell you what, we're close to the end, so I want to be able to leave some time. Let me come forward here. And I want to end on this. If we have some time, I'll go back about managerial balance. Many of the consulting firms have acquired design studios because of this. You can see some of the names here on screen. There's something they're doing because they go out and help solve business problems. So if they're doing this and they're acquiring the design studios, they are thinking they're changing. Again, this really pivoted more in the 90s and the noughts. You should embrace this kind of process. And this is where you as a user are bringing together the power of your creatives with your intellectuals, where you can steward this vision, glue the two groups together, help this be a vehicle for change, a avenue upon which you can do a conversion, and then really have some clarity on the end goal. Because designers always feel like, well, the intellectuals aren't understanding what we want. I mean, they don't get what we do. You have to see a bigger picture for this entire thing. Remember, your goal is human-centered approach to this intrinsic design process. And if you can do that, that's when you make products that solve people problems. And that's what really wins. So a couple of things I want to end for you here. There are multiple flavors of these. One comes from Stanford's design school, Stanford's D school. That's where the main one came from. That's the one I based most of this presentation upon. And this is also the one that IDEO uses very heavily when they combine it in with their human-centered approach, we'll see in the lower right. But Zurb design thinking has a model. You have the double diamond theory, the IBM loop. Google even has a design sprint process they use because their software design, they incorporate it with the sprint process, if you will. But it's a continual process to define out empathize first with the user, define that process out, ideate, prototype, and test, and then go back through it all over again. And this is how this comes about. So I do want to end it on another poll. I want to ask just in general, if this class was valuable to you, I'd love to get some feedback from you. This is how I use the design thinking process to continually iterate and make sure that I'm doing the right thing, and let you know how much I do appreciate your involvement here. I will leave it open for some questions. We're right at time. And I'll stay on for a little bit, but have anything you'd like to see. And thank you so much. Many of you have telling me that it is of value to you. I do appreciate that. So Lynette and Risha, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Professor Blevins. Again, if there's any questions, he said to stay on for a few minutes. But other than that, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Absolutely. And I'll stay on just a little bit. I'll look at the main chat window if you have a question there, or any hands that might be up. Risha, you have a hand up. Go ahead. And if you have to drop off, I understand over the time. Go ahead, Rishi.
If we have to build a correlation between problem solving and design thinking. So when I define problem solving, it's more of, it could be a business problem solving, even it could be a personal, or a society problem solving. So does design, how much bearing design thinking as a thought process has when you are trying to solve any situation? It could be a negotiation, business problem, anything.
It absolutely could be. Organizations use this, NGOs use this. Any type of issue that you have to approach, you're trying to solve something, just get in the shoes of those users, truly understand what it is, and you can solve it easier. I'm telling you. Governments use this. Politicians, obviously, if they're trying to understand what their constituents want. It's a way of thinking, a methodology that you can use for a lot. So thank you for bringing that forward. I appreciate it.
Just one more related point to that. So when we try to put ourselves in the shoes of, say, customer, or trying to understand the problem, doesn't it means that we come too close to the problem and might not have the larger view? Normally, one of the approaches to be out of the problem and have a holistic view, and then guide your team, right? Because if you become too close to the problem, sometimes you miss the point.
Well, here's the thing. You'll remember from the innovation course we had last week, the best innovations came from users, not from companies. Why? Because users knew what they were trying to solve. Now, the problem is most users don't have the ability, the technology, the wherewithal, the manufacturing plants to create the thing that solves the problem, but they understand it better than anyone else. So if you say you might be too close to the problem, actually, that's a good thing. The closer you are to this problem, because remember, you're the company, you're the organization that has the skills and the tools and the financing and the manufacturing plant to solve the problem. If you understand it so well, perhaps you have it yourself, which tends to be the best inventions, then being close to it is good. You want to understand it. Now, whatever company you work for, the product or service you create, you may or may not use it yourself. If you do use it yourself, you probably own the product because your company makes it, right? As you use that product, you get it. So I'll go to Detroit, Michigan, and I'll see a lot of Ford automotive plant workers drive a Ford. And that's actually good for Ford because they consume the product. They're drivers of the product. So maybe they see something on the production line. They can then go to Ford management and say, hey, I had this issue like in my own car. If we just did this small tweak to the line process in the manufacturing at our plant, we could eliminate that, this rattling of a dashboard or whatever it might be. Being close to the problem is a good thing. Design thinking wants you to get close to a problem. So close, it wants you to stand in the shoes of your users. So being that close to it is actually a good thing, I would think.
All right. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I see a lot of the comments, but no specific question there. So I'll go ahead and thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the comments. I'll go ahead and close it out. It was a pleasure. I will have this information over to the team soon, so you'll have a copy of it as well as the video recording. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.